get started properly, and I'd like to ask each of you to introduce yourselves in turn. Nick, if you wouldn't mind starting. I know we've got your slide on screen at the moment. Please just introduce yourself and then hand over.
Yeah, sure. It's I'm Nick Bay, co-founder and director of a company called Blue Eskimo, who for the last 15 years we've been a recruitment specialist in the predominantly the L&D, learning tech, and to a point the HR space. So that's working with both commercial providers and vendors, recruiting for their teams, but also corporates, institutes, anyone who really needs L&D, digital learning, HR specialism of some description, whether it's contracts, interim, permanent. So that's what we do.
Thank you. Alex?
Hi, everybody. I'm Alex Hopkins. I currently lead the consultancy and design teams at Knowledge Pool, which is a part of Capita. Prior to this role, which I've been in for 12 and a half months now, not that I'm counting, I was Director of Learning for a global IT company called CGI, headquartered out of Canada.
Thank you. Asi?
Morning all, or rather just afternoon all. I'm Asi, and I own the digital learning function within a group called Kingfisher. Some of you probably are customers, as we are the group behind places like B&Q and Screwfix, and I've been in the industry for for a long while, as my kids say, since the beginning of the internet, or even before the invention of the computer. But yeah.
So who wants to kick off? Nick, would you give us perhaps an intro? I know we're following this on from the conversation and debate we had at eLN Connect in September. Sorry, in November. Where does time go? And I think you've got a unique view of how the industry is changing. So would you like to just talk us through how you see things at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I guess, Jed, probably a good place to start. If I just move, if people don't mind bearing with me a second, because as we said, we've got some fluidity here, and I don't want to talk to people. And apologies in advance, by the way, if I cough and splutter at any point, because I've got a bit of a festive head cold at the moment. But I guess perhaps a good place to start is a comparison of sorts between the role of an L&D professional and practitioner 15 years ago, and how that's evolved to the present day, because it's obviously pertinent given the what we're talking about here. So I guess just in kind of brief summary, I guess one of the major changes has been, certainly when we started recruiting L&D, the focus was very much on kind of tactical delivery, as per the slide here, just identifying needs and looking at needs analysis, but really a kind of tactical, almost logistical, reactive perhaps to a point type of role. Whereas over the course of the last 15 years, I think technology has played a major part in it, but ultimately technology has helped to embed a learning culture to a degree. But the role of some L&D practitioners, perhaps not enough yet, is more strategic and not always tactical, although clearly that's still a core part. So I guess the slide here are just some of the comparisons from, I guess, a job description and a job spec that Blue Eskimo would have received from a client 15 years ago, to compare to the kind of L&D folk that Blue Eskimo are getting asked for increasingly these days. So certainly in terms of multi-generation employees, for example, we've got effectively four different age groups, all with differing learning styles to a point. And I think one of the, perhaps we will discuss it today, but one of the key points is the learning styles and the learning preferences of a younger generation, very different certainly than the learning I was used to back in the day, and how digital learning designers, trainers, learning program project managers, how everyone kind of adapts to that, and equally how it's measured ultimately. I don't know if people have got any particular kind of thoughts on the comparison.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, Nick. So I think although from a recruitment point of view and where organizations are trying to go, and hence the JDs you're seeing now, which are much more strategic, transformational, they've got all these beautiful buzzwords in them. When we talk to clients from our perspective as an outsourced provider and as an advisory business, we see quite a divergence in organizations across private and public sector, where the transactional and the narrow, the logistical, tactical focus is still alive and kicking. And then we have a population that is still focused and really trying to get out of that space, but seeing the needs from the business pushing them back into that narrow focus. But then new people coming in with that more transformational, more strategic view, talking analytics, talking big data, talking consulting, and I think that now our challenge is how do we provide space and support for those in more transactional roles to move up to what is required now, rather than creating a sort of two-part L&D world. So that's sort of one of my thinking. And then I was also thinking about those learning styles, or the styles with the multi-generational workforce, and how much that's driven by our consumer mentality, how everything has changed around us. I think you've got a slide in a bit around what's changed in the last in the last 15 years. We've gone for these beautiful little Blackberries with QWERTY keyboards, which I really miss those, especially yesterday when O2 went down. And then now, everything is happening virtually. It's happening faster than the speed of light. So our working lives have changed, but also we have a much more consumer mentality to everything we're consuming, from learning to jobs to expecting everything to happen yesterday. We're in a really interesting time.
That's interesting. Yeah. I think I'm getting a dose of what it feels to be like in the minority. I think I'm definitely on the other side of the fence. I would challenge both of those views, and I would say that actually we haven't seen a shift in how people learn. We haven't seen a change in their preferences. What we have actually seen is that we've been dishing what we can do, and that is, let's stick them in a classroom and force them to listen to somebody recite something. But we're actually finally moving and releasing the real mode of them understanding and learning. Just as an example, we've been shifting away. So I have found, and exactly, especially this week, I found it very releasing to not have an LMS, because we could step away from this score mode, this linear mode, and we now are in a situation where we actually are giving users what they need and what they can actually learn. So it's a very interesting situation. I think we need to stop thinking about their learning preferences and talk about the context that they're in, rather than strategic versus tactical, because there's always been a strategy, there's always been a tactic. Maybe somebody didn't bother with either, but we also always need a long view and a short view.
That's really interesting. With the removal of the LMS, I'd love to talk to you about this more. How does that then influence how your teams, your internal L&D teams, talk to the business and consult and identify what the business really needs and brings that to life? Because we're so used to having that LMS to hang everything off, because it provides that beautiful little framework. It's not ideal, but it provides a framework. So has that changed your team and their consulting with the business?
So the way that we're looking at things now, and for us, the biggest challenge, if you think about it, is around product. Let's be completely clear. Is around product learning, the amount of products that we have, the speed at which they are changing. So we are now developing a methodology which is breaking up specific product learning around the why and the general principles. That for me can come in a 3-minute, 5-minute overview. It might even be a single video. I'm not a big fan of video, but if that does the job, then it does the job. And then everything else is in terms of, you know, play around with that. Preferably if it's a chainsaw, don't, but you know. And ask the questions and come back to us and say what you think and what you need. One of the things that a lesson that I have learned this year, the platform that we're using, which is slightly different than an LMS, has the ability to have feedback from users. And when we rolled out GDPR, and the account manager who we have said, okay, so when do you want to turn on feedback? And said, no, it's a compliance. The last thing I need is for them to tell me what they think. They'll tell me they don't like it. And eventually I must have had I don't know, after a drinking session, I said, okay, let's go for it. Feedback was opened, and we got feedback which wasn't just, I don't like it, but not only in a lot of cases was it, this is interesting, thank you for this, but we also got questions or feedback which said, oh, I think there's something wrong with this or that fact that you're mentioning, we actually do it differently. And we very quickly found that a dialogue not only gets people more engaged, but also gets people something which is more updated. I think 2018, 2020, we're still telling stories, or we're actually back to telling stories from this kind of vomitarium that we had. And what technology we use to do that with, for me, the more intimate personal technology, the better. Don't think things have changed. I think we're finally coming back to our true nature.
So can I just, on a process check, can I just make sure that the three of you are checking the chat function, because there's quite a lot of discussion going on in there.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I was picking up on curation and the conversation around spoon feeding and tasting, you know, obviously checking that the size of the spoon and the shape of the spoon, not actually what's on the spoon. Or how
exactly.
So around, you know, we talk about curation and as you just mentioned, sort of more learner-centric design, getting learners involved with some of the content design. Is that going to change? Now I'm asking the questions. I think that and greater focus on curation rather than creation is going to change the needs for designers in the future as well. So we have to be a bit more creative and look outside the box more.
It's a very interesting thing, because I was looking at it, and yes, we need more curation, absolutely. But I would challenge and I would say it's not L&D that needs to be curating. If you are and I'll just stick with the chainsaw, if you're a master carpenter, and I am the L&D dude, I can bring the collection of, I don't know what YouTube videos we have access to, but I will need to ask you, dear master carpenter, which are the amazing videos that you would like the people who want to become carpenters to see. There are some amazing chainsaw carving videos on YouTube. I know, I've seen most of them. I don't know if any of those would actually have any benefit to somebody who is starting to use the chainsaw. And that's exactly what a carpenter, thank you, Bob, I was just reading a comment about being the father of a carpenter, and that's exactly it. So he'll say, no, this will probably be a little bit too risky or too difficult with a chainsaw. Why don't you start with this, and so on. I think let's take a step further back, even further than 15 years. If we were in an ideal world, each of us would have a master carpenter, with the assumption that master carpenter is what we're looking to become. We'll have a master carpenter with us, and they will walk us through the learning experience, presenting challenges and so on. And that's how we would learn. But we're not in that. So the reason we're using technology is to bridge that gap. The question is, who do you want to bridge that gap for you? The person who specializes in giving you different tools, or the person who knows what your end result is going to be? For me, I would love L&D to tell me these are the different tools you can use, but the actual stuff, the actual content needs to come, in my mind, from the master carpenter.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think we've got some strong agreement across the chat as well, from a number of people. I think that from my point of view, as looking from a consulting and advisory point of view, getting to identify who those master carpenters are in a business is absolutely critical. So I'm now looking for people who can be great networkers, great connectors, build great relationships. So yes, they have to be absolute specialists in learning, and they have to be, you know, potentially good instructional designers, but what they have to be really great at is building those relationships and be able to pull that information out of the master carpenter, because some of those master carpenters aren't really great at articulating how they may teach others, or how, you know, what content is required to develop future talent.
Absolutely. And that's exactly where some of the comments come in. And I agree with Catherine and John. And yes, they don't know. And that's why L&D should be helping with those, you know, okay, so think that you were, and there's a very interesting piece of research. There's always interesting pieces of research, but one of them talks about the fact, and, you know, we're all familiar with the model that takes us from not knowing unconsciously to knowing unconsciously, but a master carpenter would probably be in a very interesting position, because they don't even remember what they found hard when they started. So the L&D should sit there and say, okay, now think that, put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's starting. Would that be something they should start? No, actually, it's too complicated. So that's exactly where we need to support and guide.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely. I agree with everything. I think the other thing is talking to heads of learning and CLOs, etc. That there's an increasing need, just on this note, to for learning designers to operate as consultants more and more, and also I guess assess when formal training is needed, but equally sometimes where, you know, a piece of video or even an email or a PDF or something might suffice. It's kind of content versus learning, I guess. Actually, going back to your point about video, you know, video can be very effective, but you know, ultimately, I guess learning designers increasingly have to assess where that forms part of a formal program, and where it can just literally be a piece of video, a learn on the job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Here. So, and I think that's the interesting thing. I think for me, the instructional designer today, their choice is which tool is the most appropriate. So this might be a video, this might be a quiz, that, and so on, because the amount of stuff that we're getting from all directions is amazing. And I think, Liz, you put it best. Translator. A learning designer is a translator. Sometimes we just need to chuck away some of the words and make it a very, very simple thing. In a lot of other cases, what we're doing is we're making it easy to digest. I'm not going to use an analogy of a penguin feeding its young, because that's disgusting, but and it's nearly lunchtime, but that's exactly the idea. We make it easier for others to chew. And I want to make that very, very clear, that when I say easier to chew, I don't mean that we want to make it as easy for them to consume. There is a lot about the hardship of learning. So when you make something more challenging, when you make something hard for somebody, when you have them come back and go over it again and again, that's exactly it. And again, Liz, I'm completely with you. No baby food. They need to chew themselves. What we need to make sure is that there's no bones in it.
It's digestive. It does challenge behavioral change, or that skill that we require them to achieve. I guess now we're thinking about sort of the instructional design at a singular level, at a micro level. I guess now there's also a challenge of thinking on a macro level how that individual individual piece of learning fits in with the wider ecosystem. Not my favorite word, ecosystem, but actually it describes stuff really, really well, everything that's going on around it.
It is mine.
We look at organizations, some that we're working with, and we see them having bolted on this bit of video content over here, this solution over here, that's different technology, different media over here. But actually what the great skill now is being able to bring those all together to create, I like the onion analogy, that at the beginning there's this bit of technology, and then we wrap around some other type of media or something else seamlessly, and then we add another layer, rather than bolting on different types of media, different types of technology. That's a bit of a challenge now, thinking about the wider ecosystem, even when you're designing a single solution.
So I think first, Nick, if you can move to the pie chart slide to move on the discussion. I think it's a very good, it's a very interesting approach, Alex, because the ecosystem, I think the way you're describing it as the ecosystem around the patching approach of let's just throw this in there is not a strategy, but rather my approach to interior design. If we talk about an ecosystem from scratch, it needs to be planned, and in that respect, I can tell you that today at Kingfisher, what we are doing is we are planning the ecosystem, how it will work. Just to stay with the carpenter, you don't use a hammer for everything. You have a collection of tools and use them for different things. And in the same way, the amount of things that we use in our personal life, how many of us have Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, WhatsApp, a phone, a computer, a computer being a desktop and a laptop, obviously, and the tablet. A mixture of hardware and software. And for those of us old people who still use Facebook, thank you, John, definitely this mixture of tools, we know what we use these tools for different things. An ecosystem needs to be coherent. What I'm a very small fan of is when you have 5 systems that do exactly the same thing. So you have, I don't know, a Jam and Yammer and a few other instant messengers. And then you go, oh, so what do I use this for? However, if you have an environment where you have distinct tools for distinct actions, that's a very different story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very, very true. I think actually on that point, I think when I talk to learning designers, particularly those who perhaps have come from a specific instructional design background and more experienced people in that area, actually their frustrations are not the fact that people are kind of, if you like, sometimes dumping content into the platform or the ecosystem. It's just a kind of lack of, I guess, control and collaboration around the whole thing. They're not precious about their own environment, but they equally like to understand, where the business is going from a learning perspective and what constitutes, proper, if you like, instructionally designed content versus something that's kind of plopped in there from the ether. And I guess that goes back also to the content curation piece, because that's becoming ever more required. Because as you say, there's hardware, there's software, there's content flying in from all sorts of different directions. So actually part of the L&D function now is as much about filtering and making sense of the content that's there, as opposed to developing it ultimately themselves.
Yeah, and then marketing that, because I think as there's the beautiful pie chart shows, and we've seen in the development of the LPI capability map, some research we've done, and more conversations out in the wider world, that we can have great content, we can have great curation, we can have the most whiz-bang tech infrastructure ever, but actually the key skill is really now how we market that content, how we communicate its relevance, its usage, and how we make it really attractive to subtly create that pull. So we want learners to pull that content. We don't want to be seen to be pushing it and spoon feeding them, as we've said on the chat before. But those marketing communication skills are going to become, or are becoming, way more important. I don't know if you guys are seeing that too.
Yes, absolutely. I don't think that a modern learning function can survive either without the internal comms capability or with very good links to a functional comms department.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I'd also say it's kind of an internal and an external thing. So from the point of view of internal, clearly helping to motivate employers and to help embed I guess, a continuous learning culture, but equally from an external perspective, being able to have a strong L&D brand to people, good caliber candidates who might want to join your company. I think having a strong L&D brand these days is sets you apart from, you know, a lot of competitors, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're in the war for talent has certainly not gone away. I thought that was a flash in the pan when it first came around. Certainly not.
No.
But I think there's some great comments on the chat as well, and one I'd like to pick up on. I think Nick Tompkins, you make a great point. But John, analytics, we've got to talk about data analytics. I mean, it's on the slide. It's a hot topic. It's top of Don Taylor's sentiment survey at the moment. We talk about big data for decades, now what feels like decades. What are we actually really doing in data analytics? And I guess it's a skill that I would love to look for. How much we're actually going to be using data analytics to drive learning, I'm not convinced. Are we dressing it up? Are we trying to put baubles on something that's MI and reporting?
It's a very interesting question. I'm not sure. I think data analytics is a buzzword, like mobile learning was a buzzword, like gamification was a buzzword. I am not seeing. I think we definitely need to be looking to data and using data, but the question is, which data? So for me, for example, I work in a retail group. If I can demonstrate that a piece of learning that I've made available has increased sales, then if we're especially talking about the ROI, the impact, the value within a retail environment, then by definition, that is success. Do I need big data for that? I'm not sure. I just need to have data, some data, any data. I think we cling to buzzwords. You know, marketing and communication. There was a comment earlier on. I'll just scroll back. I think it was Sarah that talked about marketing skills were always needed. This, to me, goes back to what I said at the beginning. We are now we finally have the tools to offer learning which is similar to how we actually learn and what we actually care about. And in that respect, the skills that we need are very similar skills to what they've always been. If you look at any content that we have around things like Netflix, etc., there is some marketing done. A lot of it is driven by what the content actually is. So when it comes to big data, the data I think we should be looking at is things like segmentation, is things like who are the audience. And when and just as an example, again, I can only give examples from what we do. When we rolled out GDPR, we initially thought of, okay, so we have colleagues learning through or going through this in 8 different languages. Let's translate it and make it available. But then when we looked more closely, we actually said, yeah, but it's not true, because in France we have 2 distinct businesses, one called Brico and one called Castorama. In the UK we have Screwfix and B&Q, and there are subtleties which make the scenarios different. So we ended up creating a separate piece of content. The central themes, GDPR was the same stuff, but we segmented based on the people, based on their function to a degree. Of course, the IT teams, for example, got a very different piece of learning, and we made it a lot more relevant and a lot more focused on the teams that we were targeting. And I think when you're starting to talk about big data to do things like that, that is a very, very different thing. So I think talking about data analytics, yeah, it's important, but I would say contextualize it.
Absolutely. And then also start to think about the wider picture, because I think we get drawn into the data analytics conversation as L&D becomes much more of a people change function. So we tend to be now involved in lots more conversations around large scale transformational change. And there's throw another buzzword in there as well. So we're doing bits of e-learning, like bits of learning like GDPR, but actually it's how we distilling long-term behavioral change to support the business, and then how do we draw data from other sources, other people sources, other business sources, and turn those into learning strategy. So it's we're a little way off huge big data analytics, but it can be important in some areas.
Alex, are you segmenting these kind of skills? Do you see different people delivering things, and possibly even outsourcing something like curation? Or is it an expectation that individuals will just broaden their skill set? Because there is a risk that you'll become a master of nothing because you're so sort of high level.
Yeah, I think for me, I have certain expectations around more around behaviors than skills. I look for talent based on specialist skills. So I would look for someone with a strength in, for example, data analytics or delivery or business development, particularly on the consulting side. But I'd look for certain behaviours and an aptitude to sell themselves, to sell content, to challenge the organisation, and to be able to be adaptable, and should they be pulled into a conversation about analytics, be able to apply some basic common sense, or go and source someone who could pull in and source someone who is an expert. So for me, I don't expect them to be people to be masters of all, but what I do expect them to be is good connectors, and be able to have a competent conversation around all of these areas, but then pull in an expert. So it's more around confidence and understanding of what the broader skill set is, not necessarily be an expert in them all.
I think that's a good point, Alex. I think connectors is key as well. I think going back to what Ashley said about the job descriptions initially, I put up. I agree with you, Ashley, in respect to the fact that tactics and strategy were obviously there 15 years ago. But I think there has been, going back to what Alex just said, perhaps an increased emphasis on being able to collaborate with stakeholders and engage with stakeholders in the business as L&D has become kind of gone up the food chain a bit to a degree. I think there's still a lot to do. I mean, I think a lot of, I think it was a recent survey by Mercer, which said that only 4% of L&D practitioners felt that their role was strategic in any way, shape or form. But I think if you are doing a good job of obviously engaging with relevant stakeholders in the business at all levels, then clearly that's going to help move it up the food chain you'd expect anyway.
I think maybe we need to develop a piece of learning defining what strategy means, and then we'll know.
Yeah,
because there's one thing that we do need to put on the table, and that is the fact that out there in the big world, there are organizations that are on every step of those last 15 years, and probably even before that. And I, from time to time still hear questions of, oh, this LMS, what you can use computers to teach people things, which I think we've already come full circle where today we're trying to do that less. But the funny thing is that you can actually find people who still think that a Lectora generated full screen text phasing next type of learning is a good thing. And they're proud of it, and for them, in the context that they are operating, that's the real thing. So I think when we are talking about the skills, it needs to be very clear that there are a lot of skills which are not at the cutting edge. Some of the stuff that we want to talk about here is the stuff that we're seeing in the more leading organizations. But there is, you know, if you are someone who creates very traditional kind of next based learning, there are customers for that today.
Oh yes,
And
we have plenty of them.
But you know, I think doing the consultative part, I think, is the most enjoyable part of certainly my role as a more or less a freelance ID, because I often go into a client as a subcontractor for a provider, and a contract has already been agreed, maybe a tender process has been gone through, and I like nothing better than going and having a face-to-face with the client to really pin them down on what they're trying to achieve here. And then once I've got that clear and I've pushed back and argued, negotiated, whatever, then I can go away and write, you know, some e-learning. But I think the least interesting part is when somebody says, right, you know, here's the PowerPoint, just convert this into something.
Oh God.
Yes.
But there's
I
still
cry.
It
But
does.
I think there's a requirement for facilitation skills to have that dialogue.
Yes.
And ask really good questions and really listen and clarify and make sense of what you're being told, and challenge people who, you know, who are the experts but just want to do the kind of brain dump piece.
It's the challenge. The challenge piece is huge. I just want to pick up on Danny's point on the chat before it disappears, and all the chat that's going on is around the feeling that L&D has maybe lost its identity. I think that's pretty harsh. I think that we're at a critical point of evolution, in that we've recognized that that as a function, we do a huge range of things, far more than most other central or you know, what used to be support functions. You know, we're drivers of productivity at the end of the day. We're tools of engagement. We're compliancy, you know, support. So when we look at other people functions or other functions in the business, I think we just do such a huge range of things. We're going through a bit of an evolution when we've recognized we have a huge range of skills and behaviors needed. We're responsible for a huge amount of things, and I think we should probably credit ourselves. We're definitely still learning about ourselves, because often I think we put ourselves at the bottom of the pile. You know, we're the cobbler's children, and we don't invest in our development necessarily. I'm talking, you know, huge generalizations, but we're so focused on everybody else's, and the timelines are always so tight. When do we, aside from this hour, which is wonderful, focus properly on our development and the development of our teams? It's something that I wish I could spend a lot more time on both.
I think you are sadly correct, and the things like what the eLN are doing and others are important, because just like the people we are trying to teach, so to speak, learning from each other is probably the most important thing. Just to go back to the chat for a second, I think, Gary, your question is the LMS the best thing for the learner? The answer is categorically no. Are we using them because they reduce cost and give us better data? I'm not sure about that, but I think the relevance of an LMS to a learner is equivalent to the relevance of the attendance sheet a teacher is using to the school child's learning process. There isn't any. The reason that we need it is because it is making clear at the end of the week how many kids have been in school. Now, there is one thing, however, to say that an LMS will help with, or some system, which we are seeing immensely, and that is learning is not a one-way street, despite what we have been taught at school, at least those of us of my age. Learning is a two-way street. And when we can see the eyes in a classroom, then you can tell when somebody, and I've been a teacher in a classroom, so, you know, you can tell when somebody understands, when they have, you know, when they have that weird look either because they saw something on Twitter or because they don't understand you. So you can say, okay, what do you think? Did you understand this? And you can pick it up. When we are in a digital environment and a digital first, you don't have that. So you need to be in a position where you can say, what do you understand, what you don't understand? And we do that through questioning and through looking at the data of how they have been using. So I think when I see today video, my problem is that video is completely one way. You get no data back. Oh, Joan?
Sorry, don't worry. It's just one or two people are dropping off, so I want to just capture their,
okay.
Confirm if they would like Nick to get in touch with them or not before they go.
That's fine. I was just wondering whether I did something wrong. So I think in that respect, and this is exactly around the skills. What we need to be on top of the skills is have the ability to smell the changes and constantly be out there. We also need to be able to say, you know what, this is really, really cool, but it's not relevant to us.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. And I think just thinking about a theme with clients of ours, this is just on the kind of, I guess, the content piece and the learning piece. You know, it's very challenging because a lot of them are the need for speed often means that actually they're interested more in someone who can be creative and quickly pick up storyline than someone who's necessarily going to go through an ADDIE type process. So there's a bit of a, I guess, kind of throwing it out there, there's a bit of a kind of conflict of interest to a point in terms of, you know, the need for speed versus what constitutes good learning and good ID.
Yeah, I think according to Nick, good idea would be configuring the content so that machines can learn it. I think that's an interesting point. There's so much talk about AI and machines learning better than humans. We need to differentiate that humans have roles, machines have tasks. And in that respect, your machine can be very, very, very good at, and I'll use Donald Clark example, at cleaning your carpet. That's your Roomba. A human will be a very good cleaner because he or she will know how to move from the carpet to the sink or to the washing clothes and so on. That is not where we are yet. And for me, the more mindless tasks that we can get rid of, and if anybody has an ironing bot, please let me know. That would be great. The better, because it gives us the opportunity to focus on the more interesting roles. And in that respect, I think connecting the dots, I don't know if that's a skill yet, Nick, but you know, when I recruit, when I listen to people who can connect the dots, that's an amazing skill.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
We had some questions that came in, Joan, before the webinar. I don't know if you want to cover any of those.
Yeah, we
cover
did.
all of those. Let
me bring some of those up now, or at least ask some of them. So what we talked about at eLN Connect was how career paths had changed and were changing, and whether learning designers now need to be able to do video logs and do sales, etc., be more consultative. But one question was, where will these soft skills come from? Can we retrain for those, or do we need to hire new talent?
Interesting.
It is a good, yeah. Oh, well, sorry, Ashley, but just I guess one point is that kind of difference between skills and characteristics. You know, what's inherent in someone and what ultimately can be learned. I think probably timely. If I was going to try and bring up another slide, actually, which actually is a brings us on to that point. But ultimately, what characteristics within L&D versus what skills can be picked up are ultimately going to be useful. But I think going back to what everyone said thus far, and Alex in particular was picking up on it, the need to develop relationships. There's a very good book. I think I've got a resources slide afterwards that I'd be happy to share with Jo so she can distribute it. But a very good book called The Trusted Advisor by a gentleman called David Maister, which is relevant to everyone within reason, but actually can be very relevant to L&D in terms of to get yourself known, become a trusted advisor to the business, and people will ultimately listen to you, and changes can be enabled accordingly. So I think it's a good question, and I think some soft skills can be learned, but I think some soft skills / characteristics are already there and just perhaps need to be developed further.
I think for me, some of the more technical skills that come with the evolution of technology, and there's always new things up and coming and to be bolted on, or hopefully beautifully seamlessly integrated with your onion. They will be brought into the industry. They'll be brought in by new startups, new organizations. We see those every year. There's someone new coming into the marketplace with a new idea and new media, new technology. So they will probably be new. I think there's definitely an opportunity to reskill for those who are hungry, those who are tech savvy and hungry and keen to stay in the learning market. They will need to evolve as they do in any other digital or technology environment. But as you said, Nick, down to the ability to have or to develop those behaviors, those characteristics that help you become a trusted advisor, that show your credibility in some areas, that show that you are forward thinking, or that you invest in your own personal development, thought leadership. They're really, really important. But I think underpinning all of that is the curiosity thing, which we talked about, and Phil was talking about at the panel at the Connect event. Having that curiosity, asking why all of the time, challenging stakeholders, challenging yourself, challenging your colleagues, saying, why are we using that technology? Why are we using that methodology? Why are we going back to ADDIE? Oh my goodness, I had such an argument with someone yesterday who kept on going about ADDIE. I was like, can we think a little bit outside the box? Because the methodology theory is great underpinning, but it's a start point now. We know so much more about good learning and how people learn and our brains. We need to start challenging and be curious.
Yes, I think that for me, that and challenging are absolutely critical. And Liz just mentioned that it's very hard to bring those out on a CV. I think that's exactly why an interview is so important. And just picking on some of the comments. Yeah, Gary, I think pictures in lessons make it mostly less boring for the developer, not the learner, as do the gradual appearance of the text, which you sit there and say, come on, let me read the next line. So yeah, those are not really helpful for the learner. But as somebody who was in university when PowerPoint started appearing, it almost felt as if there was a competition between the lecturers to see how many fonts and colors they can get together on the same screen. So we're evolving, we're growing. We are looking at simplifying. I think the story, the actual content is becoming a lot more interesting than the medium. I think, thank goodness, we have passed beyond the medium is the message. The medium is not the message. The message is the message. We have different mediums and we need to find the most appropriate one. It's a critical skill.
Can I ask, you've already mentioned the eLearning network, obviously we're hosting the webinar.
Yep.
What do you think is our role? Because I'm about to go into the first board meeting at 1 o'clock with the new board. And one of the things we will end up discussing either today or in January is, what is our aim? What's our vision? What are we trying to achieve? And part of our challenge is to differentiate ourselves from other people in the marketplace who are offering networking type services. So I'd be quite interested to hear from the three of you, and also in the chat, what you think the eLN can do to help people in this area.
I think if I just Shall I go first? So I think to Liz's point around difficult to show these characteristics on a CV, an organisation like the eLN, it does provide that networking, and I don't think that we should underplay the importance of bringing us all together in forums like this, face to face, to be able to showcase our characteristics, our skills, our expertise face to face, because we never know when those connections might just come in handy. Because it's true, writing them down on CV is just, it's almost impossible. But also to provide that development framework, maybe some the mentoring, which I know you do,
Yes.
to develop the skills to help that forward thinking when it's so hard in between. Clients, want everything yesterday. Where do we find the space to develop ourselves? Well, if a network or a group of people are supporting each other to do that, and it becomes important, we will grow and develop as a team, and we'll find our identity and become quite a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, I think setting the standards is something that the eLN can help with. The fact that the eLN is supporting the Learning Technologies Award, you know that the association is through that. They are defining the framework, and so on. I've just noticed a comment from Danny around the eLN should be look at its brand. Do say more, Danny. As others have already asked, but yeah, I think the events that started 4 years ago or 5 years ago, I find them extremely useful. I think it is moving away from purely vendor driven, and that would probably be my shout. The Learning Technologies conference in February is heavily vendor driven. I would like something that focuses more on the professional. That's my personal view.
Nick, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I was just thinking actually, Joe, in terms of just we have obviously a close affiliation with the eLN. We also have a close affiliation with the LPI, the Learning and Performance Institute, and they have a kind of, I guess, to a point, a kind of broader L&D outlook versus the kind of the digital L&D, for argument's sake. But things like, for example, the capability map that they produce is quite useful. I would suggest for those who aren't aware of it, it's a self-assessment tool across 25 or so different skill sets. But they also do the kind of the connect side of things, which the eLN do very well as well, which is kind of getting vendors and purchases together, and really kind of challenging the vendors to come up with new things, new ways of thinking themselves. Really, I mean, it's a bit like the kind of challenge, the CEB challenger model with L&D practitioners and their stakeholders doing the same thing in that context as well, Jan.
Okay. I like that idea. I like the challenge, the supply challenge, because I think from now being on the supply side, having come from in-house, I'd like to see more opportunities and building more confidence from in-house teams to challenge and to push suppliers to collaborate more and to create more coherent solutions rather than standing alone just for their own revenue needs. I do think there's been some interesting commentary on the chat as well. Personally speaking, I don't come from a digital learning background. Technically, I don't really come from a learning background. So for me, the eLearning brand, I had to get my head around whether I was worthy of being invited and coming to the Connect events, because although I lead a beautiful team of designers who are absolutely amazing and very tech savvy, very digital, it's something in the name. Maybe we need to be more inclusive, because we are, so you've seen the skills, characteristics, and what we do, it goes far beyond eLearning now. But the network itself, the people who are part of this are pretty darn impressive.
Yeah,
that's very kind. Yeah, no, it is a 30-year brand, and we have just updated the look and feel of the website. But I mean, the obvious thing would be to call ourselves the Learning Technologies Network, but that is a big group of commercial people, and we are quite different to that, being a community interest group that's not for profit.
Maybe call it the connected learning network.
Connected learning.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Yeah, that's quite
Look
good.
at us and our marketing and branding expertise.
Well, yeah. I think there's no need. Well, this is just my opinion, but does it have to have technologies or digital in there? Because a lot of the people who are part of the eLN, they might have some of them, and many of them will have a digital or a technology flavour to their experience, but equally a lot are just broader L&D experts.
Mm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with you completely, Nick. I think the Google doesn't call itself the digital search company, so to speak, because search today means very, very simple one thing. I don't think that learning means just digital learning. I don't think that learning means just e-learning. I don't even think learning means just connected learning, although it definitely makes it better. I think learning is a collection of things that we do that have an impact on us as human beings, and as was mentioned in the chat, on machines as well. But I think we need to talk about it. You know, I still talk to people and say, oh, but is it going to be blended? Is it going to be blended? I said, no, that's my milkshake. That has nothing to do with it. Are we going to use different tools? Absolutely. Because if you just, just give them a piece of paper to read, and that'll be fine. So yeah, everything has to be a lot more connected. And in that respect, as learning professionals, what the eLN for me can do is create opportunities where I can learn from, where I can challenge other professionals. I would like to see the eLN Connect bigger, a lot more emphasis on the big debate rather than specific presentations, because yeah, I think there's that. That said, again, we must always remember that we are still an industry which is spread out over a very big scale of time. So we're spread out over the last 20 years with our skills and our needs.
Yeah, spot on.
Nick, if you stop sharing, I'll just put up the website and then I'll draw it all to a close. It's been very, especially that last bit with all the discussion there, albeit brief. Yeah, so if I just call up the website.
Good to see you in the driver's seat, Joan. Thank you.
Yeah, my toolbar came back, which was nice. So, yeah, we've got the same logo. At the moment, we're the eLearning network. I take it on board. But we have revamped the site a bit, and we're obviously, with the new board coming through, we're going to be looking at how we can expand the membership, etc., etc. If you're not a member, I would advise, I would request that you do join, because you can join for free, or the annual membership is only £29, which is very good value, because it would allow you to attend 3 or 4 one-day regional workshops for free. Plus, you get a discount off the annual conference, for which we got very, very good feedback. So if you do want to get connected, that's the way to go. And you can follow us on Twitter, and there's a LinkedIn group. I think we've got 17,000 on Twitter and 4.5 on LinkedIn in the eLN group. So, we're reaching out there as best we can. Well, it's 1 o'clock. I just want to say thank you, everybody. It's been a good session. There's been a huge amount of chat. So again, thanks to everybody. Rich back channel chat. Yes, John, that's well said. I don't have any more events scheduled at the moment for 2019, but we've got several in the planning. So just keep coming back to the website for updates on what's happening next year. And I guess I can say Merry Christmas, everybody, and have a Happy New Year.
Likewise.
Merry Christmas. Thank you
Christmas.
all.
Merry Christmas,
Very
everyone.
nice festive
Thanks,
period.
guys.
Thank you for logging in. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye now.